House Bill 1409 addressed the funding mechanism for the Outdoor Heritage Fund that was passed here last session. The amendments are confined to the percent allocated from the production tax, the 1% production tax, and as proposed by the House, that percentage was 8%. The current percentage in current law is 4%, and your committee thought it appropriate to allocate 6% of the 1% of the production tax to the Outdoor Heritage Fund. That would put about almost $21 million, excuse me, Mr. President, in the fund, given the current revenue projections for the upcoming biennium. We also reduced the cap from $40 million down back to $30 million, which is how it is in the code currently. Your Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee thought it appropriate to reduce the cap back down to $30 million for a couple of different reasons. One of them being, with current projections right now, we would not be reaching that cap in the first place, so we thought it most appropriate to keep it at $30 million. We also thought, Mr. President, that this is a new idea that we are still working on and trying to make sure that we are spending money on the most appropriate projects. And we heard a lot of testimony, Mr. President, that we are doing that, that the demonstrated need for projects is right around the dollar amount that's been expended on projects, which right now is around $19.1 million. So this would make a couple more $1 million available to the projects that qualify for the Outdoor Heritage Fund money, and keep in place that $30 million cap. We see the value of conservation projects here in North Dakota and appreciate all the work that's been done by the Outdoor Heritage Fund and hope to see that continue over the next biennium. So with that, Mr. President, your Committee on Senate Energy and Natural Resources has approved these amendments on a 4-3 vote for 6% of the 1% of the production tax, in hopes that this body will concur.
Senator Axness.
Mr. President, thank you. I don't think it could go unsaid that the amendments to this bill are what appears to be the first of, unfortunately, a long line of broken promises that was made during the last election cycle by the governor and the majority. Right out in this great hall, there was a press conference saying that we're going to bump this cap up, that we're going to get these things funded. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. And I understand the revenue forecast, but that's why we're out here for 80 days to make priorities and to fund those priorities. And if this is not one of those priorities, then we should not be making promises that we do not intend to keep. I will be voting against this amendment, and I ask many of you to follow me.
Senator Triplett.
Mr. President, I was one of the 3 on the committee who voted against this amendment, and I too urge the body to reject the amendments. If the reason that promises cannot be kept in the end are because revenue projections have fallen off so much and it simply can't be done, that seems to me to be a decision to be made in the Appropriations Committee, where the balancing of priorities is traditionally done. But if you listen carefully to the carrier of the bill, you will hear that the majority of the committee believes that $23 million is the right amount. And so this decision is not about actually the larger idea of priorities or revenues available. The debate here today from the Policy Committee is about whether we are going to, as a body, support the notion of the Outdoor Heritage Fund and support the idea of conserving our natural resources. And I will take issue with some of what was said by the carrier. The evidence that we received in the committee indicated that approximately 70% of the requests that have been made to the Outdoor Heritage Fund have not been funded. That there are many groups, including cities, counties, schools, tribes, park and recreation districts, conservation groups, and other nonprofit groups across North Dakota who have already made applications but were denied, whether because some of them maybe because their ideas didn't fit within the guidelines produced by the committee that makes recommendations to our industrial commission, but some of them simply because there was not enough money available. And so I think that when we think about the challenges that our state is facing, not just from the enormous amount of habitat fragmentation that's taking place because of oil development in western North Dakota, but also because of the changing dynamics from the federal-state partnership. You know, we have in North Dakota always had waiting lists for the Conservation Reserve Program, and at its height there were more than 3.5 million acres in North Dakota in CRP acres, and that is now down somewhere around 1.5 million. And not because North Dakota farmers are not committed to the idea of the Conservation Reserve Program or interested in it, but simply because the federal government is no longer funding it at the rates that they used to. So, you know, there are very large environmental and land stewardship issues in North Dakota that have not been dealt with. And, you know, to the extent that the right programs or the right grant requests have not yet come forward, I do not in any way believe that that's because the need is not there or because the fund couldn't deal with them in terms of its the guidance that has been set in place so far, the policies. This is a new program, and it takes time for groups to find out, to figure out what the rules are, what the lay of the land is, and how to put it together. There are matches required, and groups have to figure out how to get matches. The issue of staffing has been an outstanding issue in terms of small groups that don't have a lot of staff trying to figure out how to propose a program and then actually make it work when the rules don't permit staffing expenses. So it's a program that is still a work in progress, but the need far outstrips the dollar amounts that are in there. And so I would urge the group to reject this amendment, leave the dollar amount and the percentage where the other chamber has set it, and move this on to the Appropriations Committee. This bill actually wouldn't go to Appropriations, but, or I guess it would, yes. But there is a companion bill in which the whole funding formula is before the Appropriations Committee, and it certainly will be looked at by that committee in one or both bills. So please vote no. Thank you.
Senator Shively.
Mr. President, a couple clarifications on some of what we've been talking about. First of all, the 4-3 vote is correct, but there was, in my interpretation, there was one of those no votes is because we were expanding the limits. So I mean, you know, that's not exactly what we've heard. So there was 2 no votes because we weren't going high enough, and 1 vote because we were going higher. A couple other things is much of this bill, which we haven't heard yet, is after the amendments, is the tightening of the language for the projects. I said some of the concerns that we also had for this is that some of these, you know, the intent of what we believe the Heritage Fund was set up for and the type of projects we were looking for, some of that language needed to be tightened up, and that was also the concern we had with that. As far as the question about the money, I think the majority of us believe that because of that money, what we were looking for was, we feel that we need quality projects to fill that level. You know, when the request was made for more money, whether it was the 50 or the 40 million, we were looking at a whole different funding structure for the way that, you know, what we were looking at as a state. But quite frankly, that's kind of irrelevant, because I think what the committee was looking at is we're looking for $30 million worth of quality projects. What we're looking for is good quality projects that meet that level and going up to that. I would imagine if we had whatever kind of figure you put in there, we would have enough projects to fill that. But what we were looking for is to make sure we have the quality of projects which the language that this bill originally was intended to was to fine-tune that what the intent of the Heritage Fund was for. So, that's the second question, whether it should be 30 or 40 is not, is the question is are we getting the right kind of projects and are we at that level at that time?
Further discussion? Hearing none, the question is on the proposed amendments to House Bill 1409. As many senators are in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The amendments are adopted. Switching to the 14th order, House Bill 1409. Madam Secretary.
Engrossed House Bill 1409 with Senate amendments. A bill for an act to amend and reenact sections 54 and 57 of the North Dakota Century Code relating to the funding and purposes of the Outdoor Heritage Fund and to provide an effective date.
Senator Unruh.
Mr. President, the Outdoor Heritage Fund was created by the legislature in 2013. The fund is governed by the Industrial Commission. A 16-member advisory board with 12 voting members reviews applications from eligible organizations such as nonprofits, state agencies, political subdivisions, and tribes, and makes grant funding recommendations. There are 4 directives that the Outdoor Heritage Fund Advisory Committee tries to fill, and those directives are Directive A, providing access to private and public lands for sportsmen, including projects that create fish and wildlife habitat and provide access for sportsmen. Their Directive B is to improve and maintain and restore water quality, soil conditions, plant diversity, animal systems, and to support other practices of stewardship to enhance farming and ranching. Directive C, develop, enhance, conserve, and restore wildlife and fish habitat on private and public lands. And Directive D, to conserve natural areas for recreation through the establishment and development of parks and other recreation areas. After 4 grant rounds this last biennium, the North Dakota Industrial Commission has awarded $19.1 million for 64 projects across the state of North Dakota. Leveraged with other funding sources, Mr. President, this is a total of $85 million of expended dollars on projects. As the Outdoor Heritage Fund Advisory Board took a look at their first grant round, they asked for all and any types of projects that anybody thought any group would qualify for. And they got, Mr. President, as we heard in testimony, all different types of projects. Receiving all of these different types of projects, they decided that they should probably have some additional guidelines to follow when granting these dollars. So after that first grant round in January 2014, and after consultation with legislators who were involved in the development of the fund, the Industrial Commission based recommendation from the Outdoor Heritage Fund Advisory Board that stated that except for extenuating circumstances, the Commission would not consider funding for projects already completed, projects that are ongoing, for staffing, for feasibility studies, for annual maintenance, for paving projects for roads and parking lots, for swimming pools, for non-permanent equipment, research, and projects where the applicant is not directly involved in the project. A 25% match from the applicant was also strongly encouraged. So the bill in front of you today codifies that original intent of the legislature and the policies that were set forth by the group after that first grant round. So if you take a look at the bill, Mr. President, subsection 1 of section 1 clarifies that the Outdoor Heritage Fund is for conservation purposes throughout the state of North Dakota to improve, maintain, and restore all of our natural resources here in the state that we all value so much. If you take a look at subsection 3 of section 1, It clarifies and codifies all of the objectives that I listed previously that your Outdoor Heritage Fund Advisory Board laid out at the beginning of granting the dollars. Subsection 2 of Section 2 places some limitations on the duration of how long an offer can be pending. It also requires matching funds and also would exclude any money appropriated from the state general fund as use for matching funds unless the Legislative Assembly gives that directive to the Outdoor Heritage Fund. Subsection 3 allows for an outside consultant to design and implement an approved project in very narrow and specific cases. Section 3 addresses the funding mechanism for the Outdoor Heritage Fund and places that at 6% of 1% of the gross production tax, with a cap of $15 million per year and $30 million per biennium. Your Committee on Energy and Natural Resources recommends a due pass on engrossed House Bill 1409 with a vote of 4-3 and hopes that this body will do the same.
Senator Mathern.
Thank you, Mr. President. I note that with the adoption of the amendments, we have changed the percent available that going into this fund from 8 to 6, and we have changed the amount per year cap from 20 million to 15 million. It would appear to me then this is a pretty significant fiscal effect. And I note on the calendar there's no re-referral to the Appropriations Committee, and it would seem that would be in order. And so I'm just wondering what the intent is there on the referral of this bill.
Senator Unruh. Senator Holmberg, yes,
Mr. Chairman,
of course.
we researched this bill and also visited with Legislative Counsel, and our rules do not provide that we see this bill.
Senator Triplett.
Mr. President, given that the amendments reducing the cap and the dollar and the percentage amount of revenues going into the bill were adopted by the body, I would recommend that we now kill the bill. The language that the carrier described in some detail of tightening up and codifying the guidelines that have been adopted by the committee and the Industrial Commission really are not necessary in legislation. The Outdoor Heritage Fund Commission apparently committee, I guess it's called, requested that we do this. I guess just to give a little backbone to their decision making, but they're the ones who came up with these after the first grant round, as the carrier described. They've been in effect for the last year and a half or thereabouts while this was through the second, third, and fourth grant rounds, and it seems to me they are perfectly capable of continuing to use their own guidance to good effect, and if it's not in written in code, they could actually change it over time if they saw reasons to adjust some of these guidelines up or down or in or out as their good sense dictates. So, I think this bill is really quite unnecessary. The only improvement in the process that is reflected in this bill is that it does allow that very tightly controlled staffing as the carrier described it on page 3 at lines 6 through 11, that they may approve expenditures for staffing or an outside consultant to design or implement an approved project, but it may not exceed 5% of the grant if it's a smaller grant, nor 10%. 5% for the larger grants and 10% for the smaller grants. But at any rate, it is a very minimal staffing. there was an effort in the committee to increase that, and that was turned back by the majority of the committee. So, it's not a staffing amount that has very much impact. Again, it seems to me that the Industrial Commission or the committee could, on their own motion, make decisions in appropriate cases to provide for staffing as they need to. So this is a bill that is really quite unnecessary and I think almost punitive in the way that it seeks to reduce the dollar amounts and the percentages without consideration by the Appropriations Committee. As I said before when we were discussing the amendments, the Appropriations Committee is traditionally where we have made decisions prioritizing and comparing one project against another, one budget against another. So I would respectfully request a no vote on the bill.
Senator Schneider.
Mr. President, just asking the President to clarify a procedural issue here. I'm looking at Senate Rule 329, and perhaps the chair of the Appropriations Committee could weigh in as well, and maybe there's something that I'm not picking up here. But it seems that every bill or resolution proposing a change in the audit or fiscal procedures of a state agency or institution must be referred to committee and then re-referred to appropriations. So just seeking some clarification on that rule and why it is or isn't applicable in this case.
The rule having been interpreted in committee by the committee chair, Senator Holmer, do you wish to articulate on that, or should we could have a conference up here too and go through the matter? But Senator Holmberg?
Mr. Chairman, the effect of the passage of this bill does not affect a state agency or department. So that's why the council, when I visited with them, and as you notice, the House Appropriations Committee also did not take this bill under their advisement. So therefore, we chose not to.
If you would give me one moment, please. Senator Schneider, do you have any response to Senator Holmberg's?
I'm doing my best to learn as I go here, Mr. President, but I don't think the operative phrase is agency or department. It's actually agency or institution.
Direct us to the, if you could, to the paragraph.
This is Rule 329.
Yeah, I got that.
Sub
Which
1,
paragraph?
Sub
Okay.
1.
Yep.
And it relates to the fiscal procedures of a state agency or institution. I think it at least is a fair argument to make, Mr. President, that the commission in this bill is a state institution. And I don't have a detailed argument one way or the other. I'm just wondering if we thought this through appropriately in terms of whether this should be referred to appropriations.
Understand your argument. The President rules that that Senator Holmberg's argument on that matter is correct. It is not qualifying under the rules adopted by this Senate. But it's a fair argument. But I read it as being correctly articulated by Senator Holmberg in this regard. Further discussion? Any further discussion? Senator Shively, I knew there was another light on there.
Mr. President, just a couple things. The increases were put on by the House. What the Senate did in our committee was we put them back to where they are now. The 30 and the $15 million limits is exactly what we have in law. The only change in this is the percentage, which would allow that bucket to fill up faster if the oil prices were exactly the same in the bienniums. So, I mean, it's not that we're changing the amounts. They're the same as what is currently in law. The only change is that we're increasing the percentage from 4 to 6 would allow that bucket to fill up faster. So,
Senator Mathern.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's really why I raised the point. When you change the percentage, you change dramatically the consequence. We do this in many bills and many funding formulas. And when we change the percent, we change the amount of dollars significantly in what any program has available to it. If we start down a road where a change in the percent no longer requires an appropriation hearing, there will be chaos in the budgeting. With all of the funds that we have available and all of the formulas that we have in place, it becomes a circumvention of the appropriations process in the Senate. I think the ruling is a mistake. It's regarding the other rules. So I think that's another reason to defeat this bill. We have to get back on track in solving our financial problems with correct procedures. And if we exempt a change in the percent from our procedures, we will have chaos in our budgeting.
Understanding the argument, the President has heard the arguments, considered them both, and ruled that that the rule is being adhered as near as the President can tell. I respectfully request the Senate debate the bill itself, not the procedures of the Senate, which we've ruled on already. If there's further argument on the bill itself, that would be germane to the debate. Anything else, I would respectfully urge you to consider outside of the appropriate debate in the Senate today. There's a bill before the Senate. The procedure matter has been ruled on. Any further discussion on House Bill 1409, final passage? Hearing none, that is the question. The final passage of House Bill 1409. Would the Secretary please open the key? All senators record your vote. All senators have voted. Any senator wishing to change their vote? Secretary will close the key. Final tally on House Bill 1409 reveals 36 senators voting yea, 11 senators voting nay. The bill is passed. Back to the sixth order.